Hi, I'm poet and writer Kay Spivey. I don't know what to call this other than like old lady yells at clouds. I just wanted to kind of rant and ramble and talk about something that I've been thinking about a whole lot, and it has to do with the poetry community. So there's not a ton of poetry community still on YouTube. And I've been noticing lately that a lot of people who regularly talk about poetry, either doing poetry review collections or reading their own poetry, a lot of people who regularly do videos like this are a lot younger than me. A lot of you are in high school or early college, and I'm gonna be 30. So I'm out here representing for the older people who are interested in poetry. But it is also that seems to be the case mostly on YouTube and not on a lot of other platforms. A lot of people who are on Twitter who are very outspoken about poetry are a lot older than me. What I wanted to talk about specifically is how a lot of y'all are interested in different kinds of poetry than I am. The majority of the younger people who are posting and reviewing and interested in poetry, who are like enthusiastic about poetry, are reading a lot of the same kinds of books. They're reading the books that are what is called modern poetry, or usually more contemporary poetry. It is contemporary poetry. It's the terribly named Instapoets. Named that after Rupi Kaur got her start from Instagram, so it's not really a negative thing, but it has been portrayed that way. So you see a lot of the same collections. Other than Rupi Kaur, there's usually Amanda Lovelace, there's usually Lang Leave. R.L. Stein, I believe is how the other one you say his name. And it's a lot of poetry that doesn't quite gel with me, and I know a lot of that is because I am too old for it. It is for the generation coming up now, and a lot of it is very emotionally charged, and that seems to be what people are interested in. These kinds of poems didn't really exist when I was younger, or they didn't have the same charge that they have now. They didn't draw the same audience the same way. It was a lot more, that's what you write in your journal, and good poetry is longer poetry. So I started thinking about this because I was watching someone who was definitely younger than me, but she was talking about the different poetry books that she liked, and she mentioned Sarah Kay, and I was like, oh great. And she said something to the effect of that Sarah Kay's poetry wasn't what you typically find in poetry books or in modern poetry books because the poems were really long. And I was just like, oh, but to me that's what poetry is. Like when I was growing up and I was learning about poetry, there wasn't nearly the community for it. Poetry was a little bit more of a thing you did like on the side. It wasn't cool. Even in my poetry classes, there were a lot of people who were a little snobby about poetry. The greats did back in the day, but nowadays just little girls wearing the drum. Like there was a lot of snobbiness when it came to poetry, and that's why I'm really interested. I want to know more about this current movement, but it's just not my style of poetry. It's not something I enjoy reading very much, and I want to talk about that. One of the things that's really interesting about poetry is that there's a lot of selfishness to it. When you write a poem, regardless of what you say your intentions are, you're writing the poem for you. You're writing the poem about you and for you. In one way or another, it's a very personal thing. Even if it's not meant to be autobiographical, the poem is still for yourself. And when somebody reads a poem, that poem is also for that person. So you write a selfish poem and then they read a selfish poem, and that's kind of how poetry works. Everyone gets something different out of it, but we all kind of take the poem and make it suit our needs. Does that make sense? And sometimes the author's intention matches up with the reader's feeling, and usually that's when a poem is really universally liked and universally successful, is when the poet has done a really good job of crossing that line so that what I'm selfishly writing resonates with what you're selfishly reading. That to me is what makes a good poem, and a lot of that has to do with using language well, with painting a scene, with really drawing us into a story, and to me that takes a lot of words. But to a lot of younger readers, it doesn't take a lot of words. And that's why some of these very, very short snippety poems have become so popular, because they'll say something in very few words that a younger reader will read, or even an older reader. I'm not dismissing this at all. And it'll hit them really hard. However, it still bothers me when someone will read something and they'll be like, oh, it was so good, it just impacted me. I'm gonna to not shade on anybody, because I think a lot of people are doing a really good job of hitting this niche of saying the things they want to say in a succinct way, but because I've seen it a couple of times, I'm going to make something up to get my point across, just to not throw shade at anybody in particular. Someone will read like a page from one of the collections that they love and they'll be like, this is the best poem, and it'll be something like, when life gives you lemons, make lemonade. And then they'll say, that struck me, that reminded me of this, and this. And to me, I'm sitting here like, wait, it wasn't even a poem, that was just a straight up idiom. It's not saying anything. Like, I don't get how that hit you that way, because it wasn't even good poetry to me. And I feel like this is happening more and more, and like I'm not understanding it when it's that. And I hate to sound snobby about it, but I'm not exaggerating that much. And I really don't want to like go back through and like shade on somebody's favorite poem, because poetry is a personal thing. Like I said, it's a selfish thing. You probably got something totally different from it. It could be exactly the words you wanted to hear. And I actually have poems like that too, where it's just a short snippet that means so much to me. There's one, let me pull it. It's a Jack Gilbert poem. And actually the poem doesn't even matter, so I won't even go in and find the actual poem for you. But the last line of it is, the fact of her goes on, loved or not. And to me, that defined me for a very long time. That small sentiment just impacted me so strongly. But part of that hitting me, that portion hitting me, was that there was a lot of other things going on around it. There was a whole poem where he's talking about this woman who he doesn't end up with, basically, where he's coming to a realization that him loving her is not what makes her her. But it's that part at the end that I grasped onto. And so a lot of poems now to me feel like they're only that portion at the end. And I'm not sure if that then is poetry or not. I would love to hear someone, especially some of these younger people who are interested in poetry, like explain to me why this is so good. I think one of the things that I think sets Rupi Kaur apart from this, because I want to make a distinction, because I was really impressed with Milk and Honey. I haven't read her new collection, but if you read the sections, each section in Milk and Honey reads as an entire piece. And there was another one recently. I've been reading Don't Call Us Dead by Denez Smith, which is fantastic, but the very first poem isn't long in any regard. I'm going to show you. So it's not long by itself, but it goes on. 22 pages in, it's all the same poem. There's not a lot of words, but the words are done so well, and it paints this really interesting picture. And I think some of these shorter poems can do that. Obviously, there's way more words in Denez Smith's poem than there were in Rupi Kaur's. And a lot of Rupi Kaur's impact, ooh, I'll show a scandalous one. A lot of Rupi Kaur's impact is having the picture next to the words, giving you more with the image, and just having the words as almost a supplement. But to me, that's not what poetry was. It's not the poetry that I grew up with. To me, a poem, a short poem, would be like this. This is by John Ray Bickey. This is a short poem to me. Whereas perhaps here would be a long poem where it goes on pages and pages like Denez Smith's does. Or a longer poem would be something like with Sarah Kay, where you have something very dense. This is practically a novel, but it is a poem. Or this, to me, is what a standard poem looks like. Longer lines, thick stanzas, a lot going on. But I still understand that someone could go on and have a thick poem. There's another one in Denez Smith's where, this is brilliant, because I saw this and I was like, oh, super intimidated. But the idea is, the page is as black as it can be. There are as many words on this page as can fit, and they all are saying something. And does it mean that that's better poetry than like the 3 stanzas of Rupi Kaur? Does it mean that there's more value in that? And I don't think that's necessarily what I want to say. Here's another version. Here's another. This is from Amanda Lovelace, where there's very few words on the page. And I don't know that to me, oh, here's a really short one. 2 really short ones. I don't know to me if that is poetry. Here's one that has a lot of impact from Amanda Lovelace's The Princess Saves Herself in this one. It says, how many funerals can someone attend before they turn 19? And that's saying a lot. I can understand how someone would go, oh, to that. But is that make it a poem, or does it make it a really good headline? I guess that's what I'm trying to say. And so I guess what I'm bothered by is not understanding. I'm not understanding how the brevity makes it more impactful. I'm not going to blame social media for this, because I don't think it is social media. I think there are lots of long poems that people really identify with, but I think people aren't seeking them out. They aren't getting the same space in bookstores. There's still like the little poetry section that has barely anything, but if you even go to Target, you're going to find like is it R.L. Sin? Is that person's name? I don't know. I don't read his poems. But those really, really short ones, Amanda Lovelace is all over Target. There aren't a lot of poets who write in a more classical free verse style. I just wanted to jump on here to mention, since I completely neglected to say anything about it while filming, even today, the poets who are getting big nominations for things, who are getting a lot of accolades in the literary community and in kind of the niche community that has traditionally been the poetry market, are still more of the poets who write longer poems. It's still a lot of the, you know, classic old white guy, old white professor, and that this is a market that has carved out itself for poets who are writing in a style that really isn't respected by a lot of literary magazines. But at the same time, because of the way the world is sort of turning towards the way that advertisement works, that was sort of my point, that a lot of these shorter poems are getting a lot of Hollywood style marketing, big name marketing, being easy to access just for where they're placed in bookstores, where a lot of classic poetry still isn't, has never really been. That was kind of the point I was trying to get across, and I know that I missed that point and wanted to acknowledge it. Also, just the term modern poetry, did I not say this before? I did a little history of American poetry video, which I will link, and also down below, I suppose. I don't know, I won't link it down below. I never link anything down below, I'm sorry. It'll be linked up above. I did a history of American poetry to kind of understand why people kept calling the current poetry scene, the Instapoetry scene, modern poetry, because it isn't modernist poetry. And I went into that, and it is the like current contemporary form. Anyway, go check out my video. But a lot has happened since then. I've had a lot of like time to think and time to like watch these reactions as people get more and more into these really short, like emotionally clickbaity poems. Oh, is that bad? I feel really bad because I think some people do this really well, and I think there are also a lot of people benefiting from this style and doing it very poorly. That's what I'm getting at with this. I feel like there's a lot of this being done poorly, and I don't like it. I feel like there can be a lot of impact, but I feel like people are better at spotting the bullshit when it's a long poem and you're like, I am not getting into this. Like, you are not getting your point across. I am lost. There's too many words. But if there's not too many words, people are like, oh, that's what you meant to say? That's fine. That's good. I liked that. That hit me. Maybe forgetting that they're not saying anything. I really want to understand, because I feel like this is the current poetry movement. I feel like this is where poetry is doing so well, but I don't understand why that popularity is so big still. You'll still go to bookstores and you'll find a little poetry section, and there'll be some of the classic poets. You won't find a lot of your favorites, but if your favorites are the very, very short verse poets who are very popular right now, they'll be at the front of the store, and I've never seen that for poetry. Like, it's Shakespeare and nobody getting all of this praise, and yet there's all these poets getting really a lot of praise, and some of them have hit this style and just doing great with it, and some of them have not. And I feel like the ones who have done it so well are the ones who understand that words make a poem, that it's not all about the blank space, that it's about the whole progression, that a book perhaps is good, but that the standalone poems in this sense aren't necessarily what make the big picture. But it goes back to the lemons. There's so many good poems about lemonade. Why love one that's only about an idiom. I don't know if I'm saying this very well. I should have done notes, but I just wanted to ramble. I just wanted to be like, I don't get it. Like, I tried thinking about it a lot, and I love poetry for what poetry can be, for what all the forms are, for what free verse can be. But am I just old? Is it just because I didn't grow up with this style? Like, there were haikus and people would make fun of haikus, and I was like, that's really rude, because there's actually like a very specific form to them, and just because it doesn't translate well, the 3-line poems all have something specific that they're doing. Haiku has a lot of rules to it. And just, I mean, the famous one is the refrigerator. Like, what is it? Haikus have 3 lines, sometimes they don't make sense, refrigerator or something like that. It's not a haiku. It doesn't have the specific elements that a haiku needs to have, but it is within the framework of this current poetry movement. Although it also doesn't evoke strong emotion, which is also part of what Instapoetry is all about, is evoking a very, very strong emotional response, the selfish response in the reader. I do believe this video is now going to be like 20 minutes long. I'm just trying to wrap my head around, like, I feel like I need more help. I'm trying to watch a whole lot of people. Anyone, if you have a YouTube channel where you talk about poetry, I don't care what age you are, I want to watch it because I've been trying to find you all and watch and try and understand it, but I feel like I don't. Is it because that's not how poetry was presented to me, or is it that I'm right and there is something lacking in a lot of these little clippy poems? And I keep using like these derogatory terms for it, and I'm really sorry because I know how popular this style is, but they are like short and quotey, and people like to quote them, and people like to like repost them all over, and sometimes they do have a big impact, but so do just quotes. Like, there are just quotes that hit me really strongly and I don't consider them a poem. Like the one that I mentioned, the fact of her goes on, loved or not, isn't the poem. It's just the quote I like. It's the part that perhaps I would get tattooed on my arm or something, but it isn't the poem. Let me know what you think. I feel like my thoughts on this are so jumbled because I want to understand, because I like seeing the difference in the poetry movements as they've progressed over time. I like seeing more young people really, really excited about poetry. Like, this is such a good thing for poetry as a whole right now. Maybe I'm on the outside looking in about this, and it isn't something that I can write. I can't make myself write this, whereas I've loved copying other styles, I've loved experimenting with other styles, and I cannot wrap my head around this current movement. Is it because I want it to be what poetry is to me and I'm not getting it? Like, I need some feedback. So if you have some strong opinions, either link me to your channels, talk to me down in the comments. Like, what is with this new movement? Like, what is it that's making this so popular that it's at all the big box stores that you can find these poems? Is it just good marketing? Is it just jumping in on this current trend? Is it riding off the coattails of 1 or 2 good poets who then a whole bunch of people are kind of scamming the rest of us? Like, or is this something that is good, that has its own rules, that is interesting in a specific way? And make sure you check out my video on the history of American poetry. It's not a video, it's a slideshow, it's a presentation. You're gonna learn something about how poetry has progressed. And I think that the progression is good. I think that each new generation needs something new to like be like, this is what we do for poetry. I just don't get this one. Then I want to, because I want to embrace the changes. I'm just not sure I'm there yet, and I'm not sure that just giving an emotional response is the thing that poetry should be. And I don't know if the selfishness I was talking about before translates to this current contemporary movement of wanting poems to be this short quotable thing. I have to wrap this up. This is getting out of hand. Please let me know what you think. Anyone else turning 30 who learned poetry as just a different thing, who was mostly taught Robert Frost maybe and just isn't gelling with this quite yet? Anyone who's like living in the now in high school getting taught poetry, is this what they're teaching? Like, what is the thing that makes this so good to you? That's what I want to know. What makes this poetry style so good? Leave a comment down below. Anyway, good luck to all of us, and see you next time. Bye!